IoT Unplugged, where we talk to industry leaders, innovators, and major players in the Internet of Things, bringing you the best and latest insights. Tune in to learn more. In this episode, I'm joined by Joppe Bos, Cryptographic Researcher at NXP Semiconductors. We talk about post-quantum computing and the threat it poses, the importance of standardizing post-quantum cryptography algorithms, and key takeaways for businesses. Hi, Joppe. Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Hi, hello. How are you?
Yes, I am well. How are you?
I'm very good, thanks.
Great. Joppe, can you start us off by introducing yourself and talking about your role at NXP Semiconductors?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Joppe Bos. I'm based in Leuven, in Belgium. I'm part of NXP, of the CTO organization, so more specifically working in the Competence Center Crypto and Security. There I'm leading the post-quantum crypto team. Our main goal is to bring our long-term innovation project, in this case post-quantum crypto, from really research innovation towards our products. So really to automotive, IoT, industrial IoT, but also smart cards, mobile phones.
It must be quite an interesting process to be doing that, because at the moment post-quantum cryptography is very much just being discussed and there's a lot of theoretical involved. So it's probably quite interesting for you guys to figure things out as you go along.
Exactly, yeah. We have been working on this now, or I've been working on this for many years. During this whole standardization, going from an algorithm specification to a full post-quantum crypto standard. But now with the standards being out there since roughly half a year ago, we see really an exponential interest in post-quantum crypto everywhere. And indeed, it's super interesting to work on this, moving things really from research to innovation, and now really into products and getting things out there to the millions and millions of devices.
We will be talking about standardization in a little bit, but before we get onto that, why don't we kind of set the scene? Post-quantum cryptography, to sort of not oversimplify it, but there is so much involved, there's so much to talk about. Looking ahead, what do you foresee being the major impacts of quantum computing? Is there anything that we can expect happening this year?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, of course, for me, I have a bit of a biased view, of course, but in general, in quantum computing, it's hard for me to make any real judgment. I'm not a physicist. In quantum computing, they, of course, promise all these great quantum algorithms, which will enhance or speed up or have the promise to solve certain problems in practice. In 2025, I certainly hope that the progress they made in the last years will continue. I mean, typically that's in multiple directions, more qubits, so the number of bits a quantum computer can work on, that is one direction. But I think more importantly, where the large companies have been focusing on, is more stable qubits, that you can actually compute longer on this, and better error correction on these qubits. From my point of view, of course, what I see happening in 2025 is that because of this advancements in quantum computing, we also see an increase of the threat, because that is, of course, there are all these nice advantages, but some of the quantum algorithms can actually break our current cryptography. And with this threat becoming more imminent, we really see more people migrating towards post-quantum crypto, meaning cryptography which can or has the promise to withstand attacks from quantum computers. And that started with the standards coming out in 24. We only see that being increased, this whole migration to a quantum safe world in 2025. So I think that is really what we will see this year.
Great, thank you for that. I'm going to hit you with a bit of a hard question, Joppe, for which I do apologize. So when we talk about post-quantum cryptography, it's with this understanding that you need to safeguard against, like you just mentioned, the threat of these algorithms being broken. How close are we to that actually being a reality? I mean, in your work and, something you said that you've worked on for years, what has sort of been your observation or your understanding of when this will happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the key question, right? So the big question is, when can we expect a quantum computer which is powerful enough that it can actually break practical problems? So it can, because the impact is catastrophic. I think everybody realizes, or maybe not, but when such a quantum computer is there. So imagine next week that such a quantum computer would be available and it is powerful enough that it can actually solve the theoretical foundation of our security, which we use for everything. Then the world economy would simply collapse instantly because you could not do anything. Digital signatures, which are being used for lots of legal reasons, browsing the internet, becomes impossible. Doing bank transfers, everything more or less becomes insecure. So the impact is huge. So indeed, the big question is, when can we expect such a quantum computer? And again, I'm not a quantum physicist, but the experts there believe it's between 10-15 years from now. That's the expectation, that the chances are high enough that we will see something and that we should get prepared now. I think for industry, the big question is not really when do we see a powerful enough quantum computer which poses a significant risk. The big question really is, when will these post-quantum security standards be out there, and when do we need to comply with them? Because that is what our customers expect from us. And that sets much more realistic timelines when we need to be ready and support these algorithms in practice. Of course, the two are linked, but one is much more concrete than the other.
I was going to ask you on this point about being prepared now. From your experience, is it just more important to be prepared, as you say, and compliant with these standards than to think about, oh, I've got 10 to 15 years before I need to worry about it?
I think both are important points, right? So, because one, the threat of quantum computers is the main driver for these new standards. So there's a clear link between the two. But to now sit back and relax and think, in 10, it's only a threat in 10 to 15 years from now, I think that's completely the wrong approach, because we know from the past, migration from one crypto standard to a new one takes a very long time. And if we now see, so some of the big governments, the US government, but multiple European governments have published guidelines when industry needs to be ready to migrate, and that is around 2030, 2035, which is only 5 to 10 years from now. And it will be very, very challenging already to migrate everything in our security landscape to post-quantum crypto within the next decade. So I think the timelines are already very tight. So yeah, we need to start the migration now. And I think, we should not think, we have another decade, we can relax and sit back.
Mm-hmm. I think it's like you said, it's probably just a dangerous mindset to have, to think this is going to be a future problem. So why don't we talk about standardization? What have been the standards that have been in place for 6 months? Could you talk about them? What do they outline, and what do they mean in the scope of post-quantum cryptography?
Yeah, so in post-quantum crypto, it means in principle any algorithm, right, which has the promise that it can withstand an attack from a quantum computer. And so in cryptography, you typically have three types of algorithms you use. So one is hash functions, meaning it's just a digital fingerprint of some data. Then you have symmetric key crypto, meaning that if two parties want to talk to each other, they both have the same key, a secret key, and they use this key to encrypt the traffic between these two parties. And then you have public key crypto. And public key cryptos, there's one, as the name suggests, there's one public key and one private key. And you can use that for encryption, but typically in practice, it's mainly used for two use cases: signatures, so creating and verifying digital signatures, and for key exchange, meaning when I want to talk to you and we want to have this symmetric key, the secret key, how can we establish the secret key? You would use this public key algorithm, that we first do a step, then we exchange in a secure way the secret key, and then we communicate. The remainder of our communication is done using this symmetric key. And in practice, when we say post-quantum crypto, it really is talking about this public key crypto, because the biggest impact is there. So nowadays we're using mainly RSA, or elliptic curve, ECC based algorithms. And the security foundation there is really threatened by quantum computers. For our symmetric key crypto, typically it is enough to double your key sizes. So there is something we can already migrate to, But for public key crypto, there was nothing. And hence, that various organizations around the world started to look for alternatives for RSA and ECC. And that is exactly what had been happening in the last 8 years. There was a large competition run by US government, by NIST, soliciting worldwide researchers to submit their best algorithms. And then, of course, it was a race. Which one is the best? But how do you define which one is the best? Of course, security is the number one feature people looked at. So other researchers tried to break their competitor algorithms. But then, of course, there are lots and lots of other characteristics you need to look at. Which ones have the best performance in terms of how long does it take to run, but also performance in terms of how much memory do you need, what are the key sizes, what is your signature size, and all these things taken into account. And now finally, as you mentioned, 6 months ago, winners were announced in these two different categories for public key crypto. So the one category, digital signatures, and the other one, for KEMS, key encapsulation mechanisms, or for key exchange. And there we now have, the first new worldwide standards.
And so following on from that, looking at the short term, given that, as we've already mentioned, 6 months ago, these standardized algorithms have been introduced, what have been the obvious benefits of this process of standardizing them?
So I think having a standard out there, I think is really crucial. I mean, without a standard, I guess almost nobody in industry would start migrating towards these new schemes. Because if there was no standard and you would just comply with a random algorithm online and somebody finds a problem with this algorithm, who is liable? If you comply with a standard, you can say, look, this was not my choice, of course. I follow this procedure recommended by this government or this standardization body. So without a standard and without governments, of course, backing up this standard, I think nobody will migrate. So the short-term benefit of these standards being out there is that lots and lots of industrial partners are now getting more prepared. They're ramping up. And I think this is only the beginning of standardization. So we now have the core algorithms, digital signatures, key exchange. But of course, nobody is using that in isolation. In reality, these algorithms are core building blocks of much more complicated protocols. For instance, if you connect to a web page, that's done over TLS, so protocol for your internet communication. And it needs to get integrated in there. But there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different protocols out there. And for all of these things, they now need to see how can we replace these building blocks and what is the impact of replacing these building blocks. And now, so I think the short-term impact is that you see worldwide, everywhere, working groups of standardization bodies have ramped up and are looking how can we get prepared and integrate post-quantum crypto into our protocols.
Yeah, I think earlier you mentioned migration to a new standard being quite challenging. When we think about the moment in time in which these standards are being introduced, the internet has exploded. Everyone has internet access. Everyone has online. Well, I say everyone has online banking. Lots of people have online banking and things like these. So, what do you think migration to these new standards would look like? What are kind of the challenges? What needs to be thought about during this process?
Yeah, so there are many. So you mentioned online banking, but there is indeed people who do offline banking, and that needs to get upgraded or migrated as well, right? So that's one of the big challenges. So in practice, of course, you have the software solutions, and lots of people think that it's very easy. You can just push an update and you're done. In practice, of course, that is much more complicated than this. But besides that, you have hardware solutions, and of course, you cannot simply push a hardware update to replace over the air your smart card, for instance, or your IoT device. So in reality, these devices need to get upgraded as well, either to a software update or to a hardware update when a product, for instance, enters their end of life and it gets naturally replaced. But that takes a very long time. Look at, for instance, ATM machines. They don't get replaced every X years, that they have a much longer life cycle. And in the end, they all need to run post-quantum crypto as well to secure their communication. So this would be a very long process. And that's why, for instance, for lots of our products in embedded, we really focus on two main use cases. One is, of course, over-the-air update. that needs to be post-quantum secure, because then that will allow you to update your platform later with a software update over the air. And when your device has this feature, you need to have post-quantum secure boot. Think about a high-end IoT device, or think about in automotive. When you start your device, you need to make sure that you can trust your environment. This is done through secure boot, and if that process is post-quantum secure and you have an update mechanism which is post-quantum secure, I think then we're in really, really good shape. So these are, for us at least, the two main focus points. For a lot of other companies, of course, who are not really in the embedded world, I think TLS, so internet communication, is the number one use case for post-quantum crypto. So I think that are really the three big use cases where people are focusing on right now.
And that's looking ahead, looking in the next, I don't know how many years, this is what you at NXP are focusing on?
Yeah, this is not even that far ahead, right? So this is really now, right now, this is already what we worked on in the last 5 years, because when you look at when we get products out there, is we produce hardware. So now when the standards came out 6 months ago, our customers who integrate our hardware into their final products, they expect that our hardware solutions already feature post-quantum crypto. So we had to work on post-quantum crypto solutions before the standard came out. So we had to make educated guesses which scheme would become the next standard. And since we were involved in the whole standardization process, we had a good hope in what direction things were going. And fortunately, we guessed correctly. So we were very well prepared. So we already have these solutions out there right now, which are now being picked up and integrated by our customers in their final products.
It's like, they can not necessarily rest easy, because I think that would be the wrong turn of phrase, but they can integrate your solutions and their products knowing that they themselves don't have to think about post-quantum cryptography, which I imagine is there's some reassurance in that.
Yeah, yes and no, I would say. So yes, if you are a company and you get your cryptographic algorithms from your crypto provider or your security provider, then yes, you're lucky. You don't have to think about it, but still, these solutions or these protocols need to get integrated into your product, into your solution. And this will have a big impact, or probably, on your infrastructure and how you should deal with things. So there always will be an impact. So you definitely, should not think, my security manufacturer will take care of it, everything is solved. It's unfortunately not that simple.
Great. And I understand there was a post-quantum cryptography algorithm that you co-authored. So could you talk a little bit about that and what the development process was like, and how, what you learned from it?
Yeah, sure. So Crystal Kyber was one of the post-quantum crypto algorithms submitted to the NIST competition. It's an algorithm for key exchange, which in the end, won this competition and is now the post-quantum crypto standard for key exchange. It's now called MLChem. So Kyber is not really, it was our running name. Maybe, I don't know, people always ask why was it called Kyber and where does the name come from? So maybe an interesting side story for people who know who are interested in this is, so maybe first of all, it's good to know these algorithms, of course, were not really invented by us. As everything in research, it's built on many previous works. So in this case, the theoretical foundation was done by Regev, an approach called learning with errors. So it was a new type in the realm of lattice-based crypto. So lattices are just mathematical objects, and you can define problems on them. And just as for RSA, you have certain math problems. This is another type of math problem, and you can show that, on the contrary of RSA, these problems are much harder and much more difficult for quantum computers to solve. So we had this learning with errors problem, and then other people came around, also Regev, Peikert, Lubashevsky, who made a ring version of this. So a ring is another mathematical object, and because of this ring structure, things became much more efficient in practice. And in 2015, me and some colleagues started to look at, can we bring these theoretical constructions to practice? So we really started to look, how can we make something practical? And we published this, it got some interest, And at that time, people referred simply to this as the BCNS method because it was the first letter of our last names of all the co-authors. Then another group of researchers came and they improved upon this work. They made it more practical. And at that time, the new Star Wars movies in 2015 just came out, and they called it was also the time that all academics had named their new algorithms and made a fancy webpage about this. And they called it a new hope after the Star Wars movie. And then a year later, so we said that was a great improvement, and we started to look, okay, but what happens if we take this ring structure away from this algorithm? It becomes slower, but theoretically more secure, potentially, we didn't know. So we called our scheme Frodo, because Frodo, of course, from Lord of the Rings, is not allowed to use the ring. And actually, that was one of the submissions to this standardization as well. Didn't win, but it's now being pushed by European governments to extend this list of post-quantum crypto algorithms, especially the BSI in Germany, for instance, really is trying to get Frodo in place for a lot of national security purposes. And then after this, we decided with the two teams to come together and work together on something bigger. And that is what the end result, Kyber, actually is. And Kyber is one of the crystals also in Star Wars. So you can see all these researchers are very much sci-fi and fantasy nerds. And that's why from the crystals team, there's also a digital signature algorithm called dilithium. And that one was also picked as the post-quantum crypto digital signature algorithm standard. So that is how this whole story came to be. And then now we have to see how things get integrated in practice, right? But it's very, very exciting to have worked on these algorithms with these much larger teams. So it's not only NXP, of course, who worked on this. It's with other industrial partners like ARM, but also lots of the best universities in the world who, of course, work together to create these algorithms.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you off the back of that, Joppe, what for you were the key lessons in co-authoring this algorithm, both from kind of an individual perspective, but also from NXP's perspective? Was there anything you took away from that process that you found really valuable?
Yeah, I think what was really interesting to see, of course, is when creating these algorithms, lots of different requirements will come together, right? I think everybody when you start agrees it needs to be secure. I think that's clear. But then it needs to be fast. But what does performance mean? So we were with companies like Google, who is mainly interested, of course, in high-end servers. So for them, performance is king, which makes a lot of sense. But then you have companies like NXP, and we look at things from an embedded perspective. So of course, performance is king, but it needs to fit on our embedded devices. So it needs to be small enough that we can actually run it on an IoT device. So when we talk about performance, we don't necessarily mean the same things. The same with security. When the big cloud providers talk about security, they mean what we all think. It needs to be secure against an active attacker, of course. But when we talk about security, our security model for embedded devices is very different. For instance, we need to protect against side channel attacks, which are very advanced attacks where the attacker has the device in their hands. For instance, if you have your credit card or your IoT device, you can, for instance, shoot lasers at it in the hope that you can disturb the device and in that way learn information about the secret key. This is called a fault attack. And we need to protect against these types of attacks. So when we talk about security, we also want algorithms which are easy to protect against these types of attacks. So when all these different and sometimes conflicting requirements come together, I think for NXP, but also for myself, it was interesting to learn the different perspectives, work together and create something which is somehow the best of all these worlds combined. And I think in the end, that is also one of the reasons why these algorithms won the competition, right? So they might have not been the fastest, they might not have been the smallest, but they were really, the combination of all these things was somehow a near optimum.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you summarize kind of the nuance between organizations. And I think, like you say, is always a really good reminder that what's secure for one company is not what another company would regard as secure. So I think a good takeaway. So with everything that we've spoken about, Joppe, what would be your recommendations to businesses with regards to thinking about these standards, thinking about compliance, maybe even just thinking about post-quantum cryptography more generally, as it's quite a big topic?
Yeah, moving forward, I think, there are multiple things. So if you are, you're a business, you do IoT, and maybe security is not your main topic, and then you see this standards coming your way, it might sound pretty frightening. Then indeed, turn to your crypto or security vendor, ask them for help. But before you do that, maybe the very first step is create a cryptographic inventory. I think that makes a lot of sense, because then you actually know where crypto and security is used for your product in your infrastructure. And once you know this, you know when you migrate, you can start getting prepared, right? What is the impact of this migration? And one of the impacts in the short to medium future, I guess, is that we will see hybrid solutions. So we didn't talk about that yet, but what does that mean? Running our classical crypto, ECC and RSA, in parallel with post-quantum crypto. So why would you do this? Because on the one hand, if there's no quantum computer yet, and something might happen with one of these new standards, you're still secure because you run everything with the old algorithms. But if a quantum computer appears, let's say, much sooner than expected in the next 5 years, you're still protected because you have these quantum algorithms. But of course, there are lots of practical challenges when we suddenly have to run things in hybrid mode. You need multiple key pairs, for instance, both for RSA and ECC and for your post-quantum crypto. Will that fit on your IoT device? What is the best way of doing this? So standardization bodies are now looking into the best ways of creating these hybrid schemes. We already see that many European governments have said that hybrid will become mandatory until 2030, 2035. And then we will completely migrate to post-quantum crypto. But this will have a big impact on infrastructures out there. So if you start to think about migration, definitely see, is there an impact for hybrid schemes and for post-quantum, of course. Keys will be much bigger. So we were slowly migrating from RSA to ECC in the past. Why? Because ECC had much smaller keys. People really like that. Now we will get, so I think keys for ECC were only a handful of bytes. Now order of magnitude for keys is kilobytes. So we are getting orders of magnitudes larger keys, which for some devices is perfectly fine. If you have a laptop or your phone, I don't think that will be a problem at all. But for very embedded IoT devices, this might be a real challenge to store all this key material on your device. So it really depends on your business. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges for the embedded world is, I think, memory and key storage. It's not necessarily performance. I think that's a challenge as well. But I think the biggest concern really is memory.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Joppe, for taking the time to talk about this topic with me. I appreciate it's not something that you can easily fit in 30 minutes, but all the same, I think it was a great overview. So thank you for being here.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, it was a pleasure.
IoT Unplugged.